Welcome, everyone. We're so excited to have you here for National News Literacy Week, Kansas City edition. This is presented at the national level by the EW Scripps Company and the News Literacy Project. And here in Kansas City, it's presented by the Kansas City Public Library and by the American Public Square's Civic Education Initiative and our local journalists. We're so excited to be with you today. I'm Jenny Garman. I'm the Legal and Government Specialist for the Kansas City Public Library. We have 3 of these sessions, so if you're joining us for each one of them, you might hear me say some of the same things over again. It's just to make sure everybody has the same sort of experience and same background. As a legal and government specialist here at the Kansas City Public Library, I get to connect you to legal and government resources when they could have answers to the questions you have. That means I get to be a part of strengthening civic engagement here in Kansas City, and that's really important to me. Again, we're here for National News Literacy Week, and because news literacy is such a broad topic, we've decided to hone in on 3 focus areas. Democracy, which was on Monday, super fun, and it was already ready for you to view if you didn't get to be a part of that. Today is all about disinformation, and Friday will be about distrust. Big, that's the triple D right there. I'm excited to see participants today from Kansas City and St. Louis and beyond. And some of our participants are local high school students. That is possible because of our partnership with American Public Square's Civic Education Initiative, led by Tricia Maxfield. And I hope you'll go ahead and share a little bit more information about that, Tricia.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you for all your efforts to bring us together on this really important and kind of urgent call to address these issues. I am Tricia Maxfield. I work with American Public Square, and I lead the Civics Education Initiative. This year, we are partnered with the 6 schools that you see on screen. Heads up, students, if you're asking a question today, we encourage you to do that in the chat. Let us know which school that you're with so we can give a shout out to that school. In the Civics Education Initiative, we teach a curriculum in which students examine 3 essential questions. Number 1, can you agree to disagree better? Number 2, are you debating or deliberating? And finally, and maybe the most important, how do we evaluate disinformation, misinformation, and bias? Our individual bias and cultural lens that everything gets filtered through. We hear an urgent call from teachers for opportunities and resources to support them in providing media literacy to their students. And one of the most important ways we have found to do that is to bring journalists. So this opportunity today is really valuable. I appreciate the journalist's time, and I really thank Jenny for pulling this all together. If you have any questions about American Public Square, you can find me on the website at americanpublicsquare.org. And a little shameless plug, we have a big panel event tomorrow evening as we're discussing important civic issues. Tomorrow's panel discussion will be focused on elections, history of, laws impacting, what does the future look like? So please go to americanpublicsquare.org and join us tomorrow evening. Thank you, Jenny.
Sure thing. Thank you, Tricia. Let's get to it. So before we go too much farther, if you just are joining us, I want to remind you this event is being recorded. So that's why we're asking you to stay muted with your camera off. Otherwise, you are part of this event. And we're so excited that you are. We want you to add your questions for the panelists in the chat section. We'll be tracking that, and we will have time for that at the end of the program. The recording will be posted to our YouTube site, and we expect that captioning will be available there. And I will be sending out a resource a resource email just covering everything we've talked about today, links to everything that we've talked about. So if you're watching today and you're trying to keep track of everything, don't worry, I've got it for you. If you're watching a recording, please just contact me at jennygarman@kclibrary.org for those resources. So you joined us knowing that news literacy has a vital role in our democracy, and that this week is part of an enduring effort. This is the third annual event to bring local journalists to the table and to inspire you as a news consumer to practice news literacy. And we want to practice news literacy because we see truth and evidence and facts all mixed in with disinformation and misinformation, rumors, everything, and what we read and see and hear in our daily lives. And that can feel really overwhelming at times, but we can all learn to identify misinformation and disinformation through news literacy. I think of it as kind of flexing your puzzle solving abilities, because you have to you have to identify credible information. You have to seek out reliable sources and know what they look like. And you have to apply critical thinking skills. What's fact-based? What's not right? What's a falsehood? So according to the News Literacy Project, news literacy, and I'm quoting here, is the ability to determine the credibility of news and other content. It includes the ability and knowledge to identify different types of information and to use the standards of fact-based journalism to determine what to trust, share, and act on. Becoming news literate also means recognizing the critical role of the First Amendment and the role of a free press in a democracy. People of all ages and backgrounds with news literacy skills can be more active in their communities and more equal and engaged participants in civic life. So now you know, if you wondered, why is the legal and government specialist of the library doing this? Why I am doing this, why this is such a passion of mine. News literacy impacts every facet of our lives, whether that's our democracy, whether that's our health, whether that's our finances, whether that's where do we want to go, who do we trust? Oh, and what's the News Literacy Project? If you've visited my critical thinking and fact-finding page on the library's website, you'll see that I use a lot of their resources. I highlight a lot of their resources. They are a nonpartisan national education nonprofit. They provide programs and resources for educators and the general public to teach, learn, and share the abilities to be smart, active consumers of news and information and equal and engaged participants in civic life and our democracy. So let's get started with our program focus on disinformation and meet our wonderful panelists. Abby Hoover is the managing editor of Northeast News right here in Kansas City. And Peggy Lowe is with our local NPR station, KCUR. Please introduce yourself, and I hope you'll share what you love about reporting in Kansas City.
All right. Hi, I'm Abby. I'm the Northeast News managing editor. I'm also the main reporter here at the Northeast News. I grew up in Kansas City. I've been all over the country since then, but now I'm back and I'm so invested in Kansas City. I love the people who live here, and on a daily basis, Kansas City is doing so many transformative things that have a huge impact on our daily lives. And even, outside of my small community here in Northeast, the region is affected by what Kansas City does. So it's such a privilege to me, not only to live here, but to kind of be that voice for my community and also be able to inform them, keep them up to date on everything that's going on.
Hi, I'm Peggy Lowe. I'm a veteran reporter who has worked other places before I got to Kansas City 10 years ago. To Jenny's question, what is my favorite part of reporting in Kansas City? I think one of the best things is people are so incredibly nice that even when they turn you down for an interview, which happens more than you'd think, they do it in such a lovely way that you sort of walk away saying, well, thank you for not talking to me. So it's just a really lovely community.
I agree. I'm a recent transplant. I guess 4 years counts as recent, and I just love Kansas City. It's a great place to be. Yeah. Thank you so much, Abby and Peggy. Thanks for being with us. We're going to take a quick little dive here into misinformation and disinformation, just so we're talking about the same thing. I can get my little mouse here to work. So one thing we can agree on, it seems, is that misinformation is a problem. 95% of Americans see misinformation as a problem. And I'm sorry, I'm laughing because, hey, we're all agreeing on something. 1 in 5 Americans think that they're spreading misinformation. 60% of us think it's our family and our friends that are part of the problem. And so that's why it's important to be here today, to be talking about this. But also let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. For those of you listening, I don't usually read off of a slide, but just in case you're listening, what I have is a slide that has misinformation versus disinformation, and this is straight from the News Literacy Project. I really appreciate them. So misinformation is information that is misleading, erroneous, or false. Misinformation is generally shared, sometimes created, by people who are unaware that it's inaccurate. And this is the term that you want to use when the intent of the creator or the person who shared it is unknown. You don't know them. But disinformation is a subset of misinformation. It is deliberately created or shared with the intention to misinform and mislead others, usually to achieve a desired ideological, political, or financial result. And I'll tell you my quick cheat on this is misinformation can be a mistake. Disinformation is deliberate. So that's where we are. Without further ado, I want to jump into the questions because that's why we're all here. So I have 3 questions. Again, I want to remind you, please share any questions you have in the chat. We really look forward to having this be a discussion with our panel. My first question for Abby and Peggy is, how can journalists help readers and viewers spot and stop disinformation?
Yeah, so if you went to journalism school, I'm sure you've heard, if your mother says she loves you, check it out.
Sorry, I forgot to
journalists, as journalists, we can prevent amplifying misinformation by double checking our sources, quotes, and data. Readers can do the same thing. You know, they can read from a variety of sources. They can click on those links and see where the data was found. Important thing on our side is understanding our audience and writing for them. You know, you have to consider their perspective, their age, gender, income, education level, right? So that they can understand and they're not left feeling, you know, this is above my head. I have no part in this conversation. One thing that's super important that we teach our interns every summer is writing the truth, not just stringing together a series of facts, but, you know, adding that needed context, have a difference of opinions represented, and, you know, include places where readers can find more info, you know, linking the studies we reference, having meeting minutes posted, press conference videos, all those things where they can go to find more details. And when writing an article, you know, sometimes we come up with a great idea, and then as we're researching, as we're interviewing, it starts to head in a different direction based on what we found. And we have to not be afraid to stray from our original.
Thanks, Abby. Thanks. Peggy, are you ready?
You bet. So just to piggyback off what Abby said, absolutely, we need to stick to those old school journalism things that I think are super important, which is double checking, adding context. And I think what's happened that I got to witness in the course of my career is we can even employ this transparency in real time. So for instance, I'm always on Twitter talking to folks. I'm always on Facebook. I try, it was my New Year's resolution 2 years ago, to when people are on Facebook, you know, putting out disinformation, I try to engage in a civil way to say, well, in fact, it's this. So I think that's like a new added to do for most journalists today, is to combat all this disinformation as much as it happens. I mean, Jenny, that statistic you used was staggering. 95% say disinformation is a problem. That's remarkable to me. And as a person who's in the information business, it breaks my heart. You know, this is just a really terrifically tough time. So I applaud both your organizations for having things like this so we can talk about it.
Thanks very much. And I just saw one of our participants has a question, and I think it goes with this question more than any of my other questions. So I want to just slide it in right here. And Tricia, maybe this is one you can kind of jump in on also. So Elizabeth asks, how are our students being informed about how to evaluate news and other information?
Well, I'll go ahead and jump in, and I'd love if there are any other teachers that are leading a class or on here to add your thoughts into the chat. But I would say it is a very pressing question. We have seen that funding and resources for, and this would, misinformation news literacy kind of falls under the big umbrella of civics education generally. And funding and resources and time for teachers to plan and present lessons on this, that has just gone down almost in like a straight line for teachers in schools. So with an emphasis on standardized testing, with really, as we have seen over the past 2 years, all that is on teachers' plates and schools have turned into hubs for all kinds of challenges that students and young people face. This one probably doesn't get the funding and attention that it needs to. With that said, teachers are working very, very hard to get this kind of curriculum in front of students. American Public Square is one organization that is doing that locally to provide a curriculum that ends with a project-based learning experience where kids from different high schools come together to put on a panel discussion about a divisive topic. And part of that learning is doing the research, for that topic and knowing what sources to choose. There are a lot of resources. The News Literacy Project, which Jenny has partnered with today to bring us this information, is a gold standard. And really, it's not just for students and teachers. You should hop on the website, check it out. They have a sister branch called Checkology, which has games. Anytime you can gamify anything like this for young people in order to see how well can you detect misinformation and disinformation. But I would say really, if you're concerned about this, you should support the schools, your local schools. Let your teachers know that you want to see more of this, that you would support time in the curriculum for your students or young people to be learning this. And when you get a chance to talk with journalists, ask how you can support them and ask how you can support them to give them an opportunity to get in the classroom, to meet with students and talk about this.
I appreciate the question. And as a result, I'll also include information about the Digital Citizenship and Media Literacy Act that's been introduced. And so if you wanted to track that and keep up with that, I'll make sure that's part of our follow-up. So very great. Thank you so much. And yeah, keep those questions coming. For Peggy, and thank you, Tricia. For Peggy and for Abby, the next question was, how do you choose what stories you cover? Like, what's your rubric, to use a teacher word? How do you decide what's going to be part of your publication?
I think rubric is too big of a word for us. We tend not to use 50-cent words, but I think for us, just speaking for KCUR, it's a mix of our own priorities on what we would like to see covered at any given time and what's happening. So for instance, this last year, I've been covering what's called criminal justice. It's my first year doing that. And we decided to change the beat to a new name because we have a different sort of way of looking at it. So we changed the beat to justice and public safety. What my coverage has become is basically a civil rights movement happening in real time, with Black Lives Matter, with people taking on how we are policing in America. So we're covering that sort of larger issue. I've written features about local control because we still don't have that in Kansas City with our police department, one of the only cities in America who doesn't have local control of their police department. But then we're covering breaking news too. For instance, it appeared that the Board of Police Commissioners was trying to oust Chief Rick Smith this year. So we, jumped into that as it was happening. So it's a mix of priorities, larger issues, trends, and what's actually happening on the ground, I would suggest is the way we go about it.
Thanks very much, Tricia. Abby, you ready?
Yeah, so here at the Northeast News, it's pretty much just me. So we don't really have beats, and I get to cover a variety of things. You know, our newspaper is for the community and by the community. Our whole staff lives here in Northeast. Most of our story ideas actually come from the community. You know, we see people asking questions at neighborhood meetings, hosting events, things that impact their daily lives, like education, crime, infrastructure, homelessness, small businesses, obviously government. We focus on hyper-local journalism, covering Northeast, and that gives us the opportunity to write more in-depth things that really affect the very diverse, you know, not just economically, but Northeast is home to people from all over the world, immigrants, refugees. It's a really special place. So we want to write about the things that people in our community care about, you know, the small stuff too, church centennials, neighborhood boards, Boy Scout chili dinners. You know, it's really important to inform people about the things that impact their daily lives, whether it's on a big scale or even a small scale.
I appreciate that, Abby. And Peggy, thank you so much. One of the things that we were talking about on Monday is that I admitted I haven't seen Hamilton, but I know the phrase "in the room where it happens," and how much I appreciate that. That's a lot of what you do. You can't be at every neighborhood association meeting as an individual person. You can't do that. But when reporters can be there, when journalists can be there, and then share out, here's what happened. You know, pay attention. Like, this is what's going on. I wanted to take kind of a deeper dive into how you choose what you cover and how you even phrase what you cover. And I'm putting the article in, that I really wanted to address in our chat so that we can share. This was an article that Peggy wrote for KCUR, and I thought it was a good example. Peggy, I wonder if you could kind of take us through what you were seeing. We talk about what we, I'm sorry, I'm laughing as I'm seeing Elizabeth's chat. Please see Hamilton. I will make that as New Year's resolution. But Peggy, if you could just take us through like what prompted this article, because again, since we have folks from all over, if you could kind of walk us through how this came about.
Jenny, thank you so much for bringing up this story. And you guys, to all the people out there listening, I didn't give her this story. Jenny brought this to me, and I am thrilled that she saw what we're trying to do here. So part of what I say when we're trying to like sort of counter things in real time, whether that's on social media or not, is where this story came from. So there's been a lot of arguments in the last year between the mayor and city council and, whoa, are we still there? Oh, there we go, good. Mayor and city council and Chief Rick Smith. He's right there in that picture. And how this started was, I think it was like on a Monday or a Tuesday, the president of the Fraternal Order of Police, that means the police chief union. So the head of that union is a guy named Brad Lemon. He puts out on Twitter, wow, really terrible, violent weekend. It's really too bad that Kansas City is poised to defund the police, you know? And kids, when you hear those bumper sticker slogans, beware. So I took him on right on Twitter one morning. I said, Brad, this is disingenuous at best. You know the real reasons for why there's money hangups right now. And it wasn't about defunding the police, you guys. It was things like he had promoted his own people. They had unfilled jobs because of a lot of retirements, any host of issues. So I thought that week, all right, we're taking this guy on, we're getting this in print. And there were budget hearings, luckily, that week. So I'm like, I need to look at all the numbers and write what's actually true. So I sat through, I think, 3 days of budget hearings. I tracked down Brad, got him on the record and said, in fact, you're not being defunded. You know, you're going to get an 11% increase. Mayor Lucas is on record saying he wants you guys fully staffed. Let's put the truth out there. I have to say, I think that stopped him in his tracks too, because he hasn't been saying it really, at least on Twitter and in public meetings any longer, because it just wasn't true. So I think as media, we're getting more used to and trying to get more brave about calling people out for falsehoods. That was false, and we proved it.
Thank you, Peggy. Thanks so much. And I'll include that article in the email that I send out, and also those red flags. Peggy, you bring up the bumper sticker, like there's a whole bunch of different phrases that you do want to be aware of as a news consumer, as a social media consumer. Wait a minute, like the mainstream media doesn't want you to know this. Hey, let that be something like, yeah, so I really appreciate that. Along those lines, sometimes, and I know everything's kind of interwoven here, so we're kind of bringing up a few different things, but my last official question for you and Peggy and Abby is, how do you respond to people who think most news is fake news?
Abby, I'm going to let you go first on that one. Because I call this the F word, people. I just think it is my worst nightmare, absolute worst nightmare.
So I am going to have you repeat the question because my computer glitched and I missed it.
Sure. No, so the question is, how do you respond to people who think most news is fake news?
I, unfortunately, since deciding to go down the, path, my family has actually said that to me quite a few times. Oh, you're writing fake news. Oh, this is going to be fake news. And I think it's really opened their perspective, me working in this field, to see somebody as a person who's writing the news. If they see somebody they can trust telling them those things, they're more likely to believe it. So I'm not sure how exactly we get people to trust journalists. I think it's definitely having those facts right up front. Here's where you can find this information we're sharing with you. But building that relationship with your community, helping them know that they can trust you, it'll lead them to doing their own research and finding research in the places they should be finding it, I think. That'll help them trust journalists overall and get rid of that silly term.
So I feel very strongly about this, and I'm trying to civilly engage with folks who use that F-bomb. And when I get emails, for instance, I got a lot of them after I wrote that story about Brad Lemon. I've gotten a lot of stories about from people who support the police and people who don't when I cover the police. First of all, when they drop that term, that's a red flag to me. That means they're not listening. They're only going with their own bias. So when I write them back, either that's email or I call them back and say, in fact, here's what happened. And this isn't fake. This happened. And I try to diplomatically say, I think that what you wrote or what you left in your voicemail is reflective of your bias, not mine. It's my job to present both sides, add context, and we can get sued if we, maliciously spread falsehoods. So I try to stop that in its tracks every chance I get. That said, much like Abby's anecdote there, my Aunt Betty is a big Fox News watcher. And so every once in a while, and she's my godmother. And so we have a conflict quite often. She'll say, when she is saying the bumper sticker stuff that she hears on Fox News, I'll try to pull it apart from her. And when she dismisses me about, oh yeah, it's expected that Biden lies. Okay, why would you say that? What, do you listen to anything else? And I refuse to come down on either side of this very partisan line, because I feel like we have to listen to each other. We have to talk this out, and we have to do it in a civil way where we don't dehumanize each other. So it's a really tough thing to do. It's black and white. It's not easy. There's no bumper stickers for this.
That is hard. It is hard work. And I know that I use the news literacy projects, how to speak up without starting a showdown, to kind of coach people through how to do that. I've done that on my own, like personally, and it just, you have to really gird yourself because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of, it's even emotional because you're saying, how but I know you, but we know each other. How can we be seeing things so differently? And Trish has put in the chat here that educators are moving away from the term fake news. And you're absolutely right. Misinformation and disinformation is the way that we're going, simply because fake news became synonymous with a whole other thing. I'm just gonna call it a thing. And so misinformation, disinformation is really where we're coming from. Anne has a great question here. We use a great comment here. We use the term propaganda, and the assumption was that our enemies engaged in that, but not we in the United States. And I couldn't agree with Anne more, and Peggy and Abby. You're right in track with where we want to be in terms of civilly engaging, in terms of there's a whole project called Listen First. You can even track on hashtag Listen First, because that's what's going to solve this, is being able to see each other. Abby, you were talking about it. There's a human being behind that report. There's actually probably a team of human beings behind that report, looking out for each other, fact checking, and getting some more interviews and things like that. So the idea of there are human beings behind reporting. There's human beings behind different ways of thinking. And so just kind of having that mindset of, I can't dehumanize someone I disagree with. And if you catch yourself doing that, take that deep breath. So we have to listen to each other. I appreciate that. And Tricia also puts in the chat, using appropriate terms also helps us to not contribute to undermining the press. I agree. And that's why even in the beginning here, talking about what's misinformation, what's disinformation, having that sense of, do you mean what I mean when I say that? Having those shared terms of reference, that helps to build a community, that helps to really build understanding and trust in each other. So do we have any students online who want to share any questions? Any teachers online who want to share some questions? I'd be really happy to hear from you guys. And if you want to unmute, if you don't want to type it, I just understand that if you unmute and you join us on video, you'll be part of the recording, but you're most welcome.
Jenny, may I add to, I'm watching the comments, and I love what this Annex said about propaganda and what Tricia said too, about using appropriate terms. I love that schools have started doing that. That's absolutely wonderful. I think we in the mainstream media were absolutely way too slow to call out the falsehoods. We have just started doing it in the last 2 years, and I mean, I remember in 2016, when Trump started going down this road of fake news and that kind of thing, and quite frankly, spewing lies, at NPR, the policy was, we can't call it a lie because we don't know his intention. And lying by definition has an intention connected to it. And at the time I thought, wow, that really feels way too esoteric, and like it got us out of doing that, right? Because the media has never had to do that in the US, really. So that we're now finally doing it and saying, someone falsely claimed this today, I think is a really good step in the right direction, but it was a really, really slow one, and we're to blame for that.
One of the things I will include in the follow-up email is a link to UNESCO's guidance for journalists and media literacy, which includes, and I'll also include, I think it's Reuters did a survey, like hundreds of people, and they said, how should journalists react to lies? How should journalists react to lies? How should they react to disinformation? And one of the very first things that people responded with was, call it a lie, call it a falsehood. Don't try to cushion the blow. Like it is, that's what it is. So
right, let's use plain language. Yeah.
So I have really enjoyed talking with you. It sounds like we don't have other questions from the audience, but I think this was this was a jam-packed information session here, and getting to hear from you, Abby and Peggy, means a lot to me, because you're our representatives out there with information, with getting us in that room where things happen. And before we go, I want to make sure that if you are interested in misinformation and disinformation, who creates it and why, I want to make sure that you are aware of a documentary called Trust Me. It is available for free on Canopy from the Kansas City Public Library. And I feel like I must be in Hamilton because I'm rhyming a lot here, but I don't mean to. All you need is your library card and a login to Canopy, and you can view this feature-length documentary. And if you really enjoy the sound of my melodious voice, you can hear me on a podcast with the Brush Creek Film Review talking about it, kind of giving a nutshell of what happens in this documentary. It's really powerful. It's something I think students should see. I think families should see what we're up against. So, Peggy, Abby, this is just a chat here from Angie saying, I appreciate that NPR will always mention that certain companies are their sponsors right before they do a story about them. Thanks for bringing that up, Angie, because I know there's been some concerns, especially like with the Washington Post being owned by Amazon's owner. Can we be, how does that opinion sliding? How is it changing now that we have this person as our owner? And thanks, Kim, for dropping the podcast in there. Appreciate that. Do you have any closing comments, Abby or Peggy?
I love Angie's comment about how we mentioned certain companies. I agree with you on that. That said, I wish we would also add a line, and of course it's always about eating up seconds, airtime. But I wish we would also add a line that, they will often say NPR accepts money from Facebook. But I wish that they would continue the sentence and say, but takes no editorial direction from Facebook, right? I wish it was a bit more specific, but yeah, I'm with you, Angie, on that. I think it needs to be transparent.
And I definitely, go ahead.
Just wanted to bring out especially if people are just listening in, Joel's put in the chat too that Washington Post always, yes, we know we're owning, and you should know too, here's who owns us. So Abby, please go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, I agree. Objectivity is huge. And while individuals make mistakes, it's hard to rid of bias. That's why we have editors. That's why we have whole newsrooms looking at this information before it's published, because, we are human. We do have our biases, but we want to make sure that doesn't come across in our stories, our articles, even our sponsored content, that has to be clearly labeled, all those things that make, I think if people saw how much effort is put into checking and rechecking and fact checking before these things go out, they would have a little more faith in us.
I agree.
I just had a question about how we can get to the Northeast News. And so I'm dropping that in the chat for everybody to see. I think everybody's familiar too with KCUR, but I'll put that especially for our out-of-town guests, kcur.org. And before we go, I want to point out that something just a little bit funny as we're talking about disinformation and misinformation. The image that I have on my Zoom is not me, and it's meant to be funny. It's not meant to be disinformation or misinformation. It's just meant to be funny. Oh, okay. Oh, and great question. I am so for those tuning in, I am so dismayed that Fox News is not going away, not anytime soon, maybe not ever. It's undermining our democracy and faith in our media. Can anything be done to put an end to it? And that's where, I don't know, Peggy, Abby, if you have any comments about that from Anne's question.
I think they get away with it, Anne. There's some great books about it. There's a recent movie, I think, too, about how Fox News started. And they get away with it by generally, like within their legal terms of corporation or something, they say that what they're doing is entertainment. So they get away with this. I really wish it was all labeled propaganda, because Fox News is an arm of the Republican National Convention and should be labeled as such.
I
I'm
think,
right
you
there
know,
with you.
yeah, I agree with Peggy, but the biggest thing we can do is tell the truth loudly and frequently and share it with as many people as we can to really give them other options of places to look for information. You know, hopefully eventually they'll do it.
And we had a media literacy week 500 years ago, which means it was in October. And we did talk about the Tucker Carlson, Fox News, the lawsuit. And I can include that, or if anybody just wants to have a peek at that, I can make sure and do a link to our media literacy playlist. It's something where I think we all know people who are very much invested in Fox News and what they have to say. And just being aware of, again, being able to be civil, being able to be empathetic and understanding, and being able to engage in conversation and even listening first. You know, what are you hearing? Why is this resonating with you? Have you considered, you know, so many different ways that we can have those conversations. But that's just where we are. That's our information field today. And I am hopeful that as we all make strides towards understanding each other and understanding news literacy and how to identify what's true, what's truth, and what's not, that we can really help each other, out. I have been so delighted to be with you today. Absolute joy. And we'll have this recording available. I'll send out a follow-up email to everyone who was registered. I'll give you 20 minutes back just with a very, very grateful heart. And I'll stop the recording right here.
Thanks, everybody.